The morning I kissed a stranger in the lobby of the Blackwell Group. I was running 11 minutes late and carrying a tray of coffees that were already going cold. That's the part nobody asks about. They ask about him. They ask about what happened after. But what they never ask is why I was there at all. Why a freelance event planner from Queens was standing in the glass lobby of one of Manhattan's most quietly powerful private equity firms at 8:49 on a Tuesday morning, balancing 4 oat lattes and a folder of vendor contracts and trying not to lose my mind. The short version: my agency had just landed the Blackwell Group's annual gala. 1,200 guests, a venue on the 42nd floor of their headquarters, a budget that made my eyes water. My boss, Renata, had handed me the account with the kind of smile that meant she expected me to either drown or prove myself. I was 28. I had been freelancing for 3 years, building slowly, taking every corporate event I could get. This was the one that could change everything. The longer version: I hadn't slept well in a week. My apartment's radiator had started making a sound like a dying seal. I'd missed 3 calls from my mother, and I'd gotten the dates wrong on the parking permit for our first site walk, which was why I was late, which was why I was rushing through a lobby that I hadn't yet learned to navigate, moving fast past what I thought was a quiet corner near the elevator bank, when I collided directly into someone. The coffees went sideways. I grabbed at them, saved 2, lost 1, and then, in some instinctive, completely involuntary attempt to keep my balance, grabbed the nearest solid thing, which happened to be a man's forearm, and pressed a quick, apologetic kiss to his jaw before I even fully registered what I was doing. It was a reflex. That's what I told myself afterward. And for a long time. I had a habit of doing that with my older brother whenever I bumped into him in the kitchen. A quick sorry that came out as a peck on whatever part of him was nearest. 28 years of sharing a crowded house in Astoria had wired something in my brain. I wasn't thinking, I was just reacting. The man I had kissed was not the man I thought he was. I realized this approximately 2 seconds after contact, when I pulled back and looked up and found a face I recognized. Strong jaw, dark brown eyes, the particular kind of quiet that expensive suits sometimes give people, but with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Still, completely, unnervingly still. "Wrong, brother," he said. His voice was lower than I expected, measured. There was no embarrassment in it, no amusement, no awkwardness. Just the 2 words, delivered with something that felt almost like patience. "I'm not Callum." I took a step back, one of the saved coffees sloshed. I'm so sorry," I managed. I thought you were the contact I'd met once, briefly, 6 weeks ago, at a preliminary meeting I barely remembered. I thought the back of your head was familiar. I didn't mean, I'm here for the gala planning, I have a meeting with Callum Walsh. "I know," he said, and that was somehow worse. He reached down and picked up the lid that had skittered across the marble floor, held it out to me with 2 fingers. 8th floor. He's waiting. His name, I would learn later that morning, was Declan Walsh. Callum's younger brother by 2 years, though you'd never have guessed it from looking at them. Callum Walsh was the public face of the Blackwell Group. Warm, political, the kind of man who remembered your name and made you feel seen in 30 seconds flat. Declan was the other kind of partner. The one whose name appeared in fewer press releases. The one who, according to my boss Renata, runs the actual operation, so be careful. I didn't know any of that yet when I stepped into the elevator, face burning, 1 coffee short. Callum was exactly as I remembered him from the initial pitch meeting. Easy smile, firm handshake, the kind of practiced openness that people in his position spend years cultivating. He was already apologizing before I got my coat off. "The lobby thing," he said. "That was Declan," he called ahead. "He wants you to know he's not going to make it weird." I stared at him. "He said to tell you that." Callum looked briefly pained. "That's as close to an apology as Declan gets. It's not personal. He's not great with social situations." "He seemed fine," I said, which was an understatement. Declan Walsh had seemed like someone who had never once been rattled by anything in his life. Callum laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that cracked the formality right out of the room. "That's the thing about him. He always seems fine. That's not the same as being fine." We moved on to the meeting, which was exactly what I needed. Vendor lists, venue specs, catering restrictions, the timeline running up to the December gala. Callum was easy to work with, detail-oriented without being controlling. and I started to relax into the project the way I always did when the work was actually interesting. I didn't think about Declan Walsh again until he appeared in the doorway of the conference room at the end of the meeting, knocked once on the open door, and said, without preamble, "The rooftop terrace access has a weight restriction for temporary structures. Your tent vendor will need to know before they submit specs." I blinked at him. "How did you know we were discussing the terrace?" "I scheduled the site inspection," he said. "For Friday, 2 o'clock, I'll meet you there." And then he was gone. I looked at Callum. "He's thorough," Callum said, in the tone of a man who had been saying this about his brother for 30 years. The site inspection was professional, brisk. Declan Walsh walked the 42nd floor with the focus of someone who had memorized the building's structural reports for fun, which I later discovered was not far from the truth. He pointed out load-bearing considerations, flagged a ventilation issue near the proposed DJ setup, and asked 3 questions about our lighting contractor that I didn't have answers to but wrote down immediately. He was not warm, exactly, but he was precise, and in my industry, precise is worth more than warm 9 times out of 10. "You're good at this," he said at one point, not looking at me, marking something on the floor plan he'd brought. I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or an observation. "Events? Reading a space. You walked in and immediately went to the northeast corner." "That's the problem area. There's always a problem corner," I said. "Usually where they tried to save money on the HVAC." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Something smaller and for some reason more interesting. I told myself it was nothing. My best friend Jess had a different interpretation when I recounted the story over noodles in her kitchen that third night. "He said you were good at your job," she said, twirling lo mein around her fork with great ceremony. "A man who clearly does not say things he doesn't mean. He said I was good at reading a space. That's not the same as Simone." She pointed her fork at me. "You kissed the man's jaw in a lobby, by accident, and he didn't make it awkward. He made it very brief, which is, for someone like that, the equivalent of handling it perfectly." She leaned back. "What does he look like?" I picked up my chopsticks. "Tall, dark hair. The kind of face that probably has women doing stupid things in lobbies." Jess made a noise. "Don't," I said. "I'm not saying anything." "You're thinking loudly," she grinned. "I'm thinking that you've been dating Safe and Steady, Marcus, for 7 months. And the most animated I've heard you sound about a man in recent memory is when you're describing someone you accidentally kissed by mistake." I didn't have a good answer for that. I changed the subject. Marcus was everything I had decided I wanted when I was 25 and exhausted by the wrong choices. He was dependable. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered my coffee order and didn't make me feel like I had to perform to keep his interest. After a string of relationships that had required enormous amounts of emotional energy and returned very little, Marcus felt like taking a full breath. He was also, I was beginning to suspect, the human equivalent of a comfortable chair. Safe, known. Not quite enough. I didn't let myself think about that directly. Instead, I threw myself into the Blackwell Gala, which gave me an excellent reason to spend significant time at their offices over the following weeks. Callum was my primary contact. He was easy to reach, responsive to emails, and came to every planning meeting with snacks, which I respected deeply. Declan was a secondary presence, appearing occasionally with a spreadsheet or a structural concern or a quietly precise question that changed the direction of a decision I'd thought was settled. He had a habit of materializing in doorways. I started to notice it. The way he'd arrive in a room, already knowing the shape of the problem, saying exactly what needed to be said, and nothing more. Once he stayed after a vendor call to ask about my lighting plan, and we ended up talking for 40 minutes about the way light temperature affects energy in a room. How blue-toned light makes people feel efficient and watched. How warm amber makes them generous. How the distance between those two things was the difference between a corporate obligation and an actual event. "You think about rooms the way engineers think about systems," he said, and this time it was clearly a compliment. "You think about systems the way architects think about rooms," I said. "You're always imagining the way something fails before you build it." He looked at me for a moment. "Most people find that tedious. Most people aren't responsible for 1,200 people having a good time in the same space." The corner of his mouth moved. That not-quite smile I was already learning to read. Fair point. I got back to Marcus's apartment that evening, feeling inexplicably restless. He'd made dinner, pasta, careful and good, and we watched something on TV, and I kept thinking about light temperature and the difference between efficient and generous, and whether that applied to anything other than event spaces. Marcus fell asleep during the second episode. I lay next to him and stared at the ceiling, and thought about that look on Declan's face when I'd said something that surprised him. I told myself it was nothing. The moment things actually shifted happened 6 weeks before the gala, on a Wednesday evening when I was at the Blackwell offices late, and I wasn't supposed to be. The building had a 24-hour access policy for contracted vendors close to major events. I'd come back at 7 to retrieve a binder I'd left behind, the kind of thing that happens when you're managing too many moving pieces at once. And the office was mostly dark, just the ambient glow of the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Declan was there. He was at the piano. I'd noticed the instrument before. A dark upright against the far wall of what I'd been told was an informal meeting room. The kind of piano that looks like someone bought it with good intentions and then politely forgot about it, except it wasn't forgotten. The music stand had marks on it. The keys were worn in the particular way that meant regular use. I stood in the doorway and didn't say anything, and he played for another 30 seconds before he stopped. "You forgot your binder," he said without turning around. "I did. A beat. How did you know I was here? The security log." He finally turned. "You always arrive 6 minutes early to morning meetings. I figured you'd come back rather than go without it. I should have found that unsettling. Instead, I found it unexpectedly moving. The idea that he'd noticed something so small, so consistent about me. You play," I said, stating the obvious. "Most people don't notice. The mark on the stand is at the same height every time. Someone adjusts it to the same position." I paused. "You're left-handed, but you trained yourself to use your right for most things. Your dominant hand does the melody." He stared at me. "I notice things too," I said. Declan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Callum doesn't know. About the piano. He'd make it into something." "Into what?" "A story, something human about me." He said it without self-pity, just as a fact. "Callum's the one who's good with people. I'm the one who's good with the work. That's how we function." "That sounds exhausting," I said. "Always being the structural report while he's the press release." Something crossed his face that I couldn't name. "It works, does it?" The silence stretched between us in a way that didn't feel empty. I picked up my binder, said goodnight, walked to the elevator and stood in it, feeling like I'd touched something through glass. Close and not close, warm and not warm, real and completely impossible to hold. My friend Jess had a gift for timing. She appeared the next morning with 2 coffees, and that expression she got when she'd already decided something. "Tell me about Declan Walsh," she said. "There's nothing to tell, Simone. I've known you since we were 11. Your mouth is doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you're working very hard not to talk about something." She set a coffee in front of me. "What happened?" I told her about the piano, about the music stand, about the 30 seconds of silence before he stopped playing. She listened. When I finished, she said, "And Marcus?" I was quiet for a moment. "Marcus made pasta last night," I said finally. "It was good." Jess looked at me with the particular patience of someone who'd watched me make complicated choices before and had learned to wait for me to get there on my own. "Is good enough?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Callum. "Change of plans for the gala timeline," he said when I picked up. "Declan found an issue with the catering flow. Can you come in this afternoon?" I said yes, and the question Jess had asked hung in the air between us, unanswered. What I didn't know until later was that Marcus had called Callum. I found out the way you always find out the things you weren't supposed to. Callum mentioned it, offhandedly, assuming I knew. We were reviewing floor plans, and he said, in the tone of someone clearing the air, "Your boyfriend reached out last week, asked about your working hours here. I thought you knew." I went very still. "He called you directly, he did. I told him you were professional, and that the project was going well." Callum's expression was careful. I didn't think it was my place to say more. That evening I asked Marcus about it. He was defensive immediately, which was its own answer. I was just checking in, making sure things were normal. "Normal," I repeated. "You've been distracted." distant. He sat down across from me, and I could see that this wasn't casual, that he'd been preparing this conversation. Every time you come back from that building, you're somewhere else. I'm not stupid, Simone. I didn't say you were. Then tell me nothing's happening. And there it was, the moment where I could have smoothed it over, given him the reassurance he wanted, told myself the distraction was about the work, and not about anything else. I had told myself exactly that for 6 weeks. I was good at it. I can't, I said quietly. Not because anything has happened. It hasn't. But I can't tell you nothing's different, because something is, and I think it started before any of this, and I've been trying not to look at that. The look on his face cracked something in me that I didn't expect. He was a good man. He was kind and steady, and he had been exactly what I told myself I wanted. The unfairness of that, of wanting something and then discovering it wasn't quite the shape you needed, sat in my chest like a stone. We didn't break up that night. We agreed to think. He said he needed space to process. I said I understood. We both knew, I think, what we were really saying. Declan found me on the 42nd floor 2 days later. I was there for a walkthrough with the lighting vendor, and afterward, when the vendor left, he stayed. You're not yourself today, he said. I'm always myself. Quieter then. He moved to stand beside me at the window. The city below was gray and cold, mid-November pressing down on everything. Callum told me he mentioned the phone call. I didn't say anything. Marcus, Declan said. Not a question. We're figuring things out. I crossed my arms. It's not your business. No. He was quiet for a moment. But I think you know that whatever is or isn't happening with Marcus isn't entirely about Marcus. The directness of it should have felt presumptuous. Instead, it felt like someone finally saying the true thing out loud when you'd been talking around it for weeks. You don't know anything about me, I said. I know you arrive 6 minutes early. I know you go to the northeast corner first. I know you take your coffee with 1 sugar and you tear the packet in half instead of all the way because you want to leave room for error. He turned to look at me. I know that you're brave in work and careful in everything else, and I think careful has started to feel like the whole story. My breath caught. I'm not offering you easy, he said. I'm not built for that. I have an older brother who runs the room and a family that's been trying to fit me into a category for 30 years and a job that takes up more than it should. His voice was level, but something underneath it wasn't. What I can offer is honest, real, the kind of attention that doesn't turn off. Declan. Tell me I'm wrong, he said. Tell me you're not standing here having a different conversation than the one you should be having, and I'll drop it. I'll be the logistics contact for the rest of the gala, and we'll both pretend this was always just professional. The out was there, clear and clean. All I had to do was say the words. I looked at him, at the sharp angles of his face, the dark eyes that missed nothing, the piano-calloused left hand resting against the window frame. You're not wrong, I said. I don't know what to do about that yet. That's enough, he said quietly. Take the time you need. I called Marcus the next morning. We met for coffee, which is the adult way of saying we met to end something in a public place, so neither of us would fall apart completely. He knew before I sat down. I could see it in the way he held his cup. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it in the way that matters most, not as an apology for doing something wrong, but for the genuine loss of something that had been real. You've been good to me. You deserved some was fully there. The Blackwell guy, he said. It's not about him, not entirely. But, yes. Something started that I couldn't put back. He nodded slowly. I knew when you came back from that building the first time, and you had this look, like you'd been thinking about something you hadn't thought about in a long time. We sat with that for a moment. I hope it's worth it, he said. Not unkindly, more like someone making a careful wish. I walked out into the November air and let myself feel the full weight of it. The guilt, the relief, the particular vertigo of closing a door, and not knowing yet what was on the other side. My phone buzzed. Declan. 1 line, how did it go? I stood on the sidewalk and looked at it. It's done, I typed back. Where are you? Outside, he replied. Take your time. He was leaning against the building wall, half a block down, hands in his coat pockets, watching me with the same steady attention I'd come to expect. He didn't say anything when I reached him. He just opened his arms, which was, for Declan Walsh, the equivalent of a novel. I walked into them, and he held me while the city moved around us, and I let myself cry a little. For Marcus, for the clean version of the story I'd wanted, for every complicated thing I was walking toward. "I've got you," he said against my hair, low and certain, "whatever comes next." The gala happened on a Friday in December, and it was, by every measurable standard, a success. 1,200 guests, 300 of whom actually danced, 0 structural incidents, the lighting exactly as warm and generous as I'd planned. Callum found me near the end of the night and shook my hand with both of his. "You're extraordinary at this," he said. "I hope you know that. I had good logistics support," I said, and he laughed. "He's different with you," Callum said, dropping his voice. "Declan, he talks more. He's, I don't know, more present." He studied me for a moment. "Just don't break him. He's harder to put back together than he looks." "He's also standing right behind you," Declan said. Callum turned, looked at his brother, and had the grace to look only slightly embarrassed. "I stand by it. Go find someone to network with," Declan said. Callum went, still grinning. Declan handed me a glass of water and stood beside me looking out at the room we'd built. The lights were everything I'd promised. Amber and low and generous, the kind that made people lean toward each other. "You were right about the northeast corner," he said. "Nobody ended up over there. Nobody ever does. You fixed it anyway. That's the job." I looked at him sideways. "You came to the site inspection knowing about the weight restriction before I'd even asked. You'd already read the vendor specs. I'd already read everything." He took a slow sip of whatever he was drinking. "I read everything about things that mattered to me. I felt it. That same electric awareness from the piano room, from the window conversation, from every moment I'd been telling myself was professional and nothing more." "Your family," I said. "They're going to have opinions about this. They already have opinions about everything. I've spent 40 years not basing my decisions on that. Callum thinks this is excellent." He texted me 3 fire emojis when I told him. Declan's expression was pained in a way that was almost fond. He's been waiting for me to do something that couldn't be quantified. Despite everything, I laughed, and Declan, actually, properly smiled. A real one, the kind I suspected fewer people had seen than would like to believe. "There it is," I said. "There what is?" "The thing your brother was talking about." I turned to face him fully. "You're different with me. You know that, right?" He considered it seriously, the way he considered everything. "You notice things other people don't bother with. You make me want to say the true thing instead of the efficient one. A beat. That's new. New can be good. New is terrifying," he said. "But yes, it can be good." The next 4 months were complicated in the way that real things are always complicated. My professional circle had opinions about my relationship with a client. Renata, to her credit, said nothing official, but raised an eyebrow so sharply I felt it. I landed 2 new corporate accounts, both from Blackwell referrals, which helped and complicated matters simultaneously. Callum was, as promised, enthusiastic to the point of occasional embarrassment. He started carbon copying me on emails that didn't need me, which I suspected was his way of being supportive. His wife Margot pulled me aside at a dinner party and said, quietly, that she hadn't seen Declan come to a dinner party in 4 years, and she was glad he was coming to this one. I was learning the edges of Declan's world. The private equity firm was clean, legitimate, closely regulated, but the Walsh family had the kind of old money, complicated history that came with expectations and certain silences at certain tables. He told me about it gradually, carefully, the way you let someone into a room that's been locked for a long time. There were hard evenings. Dinners where I felt the weight of comparison. To Callum's ease, to the polish of the world Declan moved in, to the woman I wasn't sure I was supposed to be. Moments where I wondered if I was the right kind of person for this, or if I'd confused something real for something romantic. "You think I picked you because you're different from what I'm used to," Declan said one night when I was quiet too long. "That you're an experiment, aren't I?" No. He was direct in the way I'd come to rely on. "I picked you because you went to the northeast corner first. Because you tore the sugar packet halfway. Because you said something true about light temperature in the middle of a logistics meeting. And I thought, finally, someone who is paying attention to the right things. That's a very precise reason." "I'm a precise person." He reached across and took my hand, which was still something that surprised me. The warmth of it, the deliberateness. "You don't need to perform for me. That's the whole point." 6 months in, I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning, in my own bathroom, alone, with a test I'd bought the night before and tried not to think about. I sat on the edge of the tub for a long time. Then I called Jess. "Okay," she said after I'd explained. "How do you feel?" Like the floor just moved. The practical feeling, not the scared feeling. I put my hand against my stomach. Like I know what I want to do. A beat. "I'm keeping it." "Okay," she said again, and the steadiness in her voice was the most useful thing anyone had ever given me. "Then we tell Declan." "I wanted a few days," she agreed reluctantly. I used them to think, to plan, to find the words. Thursday evening at his apartment. He'd cooked. Something he did when he was winding down, moving through his kitchen with the same economical precision he brought to everything else. I watched him for a while before he looked up. "You're quieter than usual," he said. "I'm thinking. You think loudly." He put down the spoon. "Tell me." "I'm pregnant." The word landed in the room and sat there. Declan went very still. The particular stillness I'd learned wasn't absence of feeling, but the opposite, processing running deep and fast beneath the surface. He stood at the kitchen counter for 3 full seconds before he moved. He came around to where I was sitting and crouched down in front of me, eye level. "Ours," he said. "Yes, and you've decided." "I have," I held his gaze. "If you don't," he kissed me. Quiet and certain, both hands cupping my face. When he pulled back, his eyes were darker than usual, something moving in them I'd only seen in small flashes before. "I want this," he said. "Want you. Want whatever we're building." His thumb moved across my cheekbone. "Is that clear enough?" "Very clear." He shifted to sit beside me and put one hand flat against my stomach, careful and wondering. "We should tell Callum before he finds out some other way and makes it into a thing." "Despite everything," I laughed. "He's going to make it into a thing," I said. "He absolutely is," Declan agreed, and he was smiling. That real smile, the one I'd started to feel like I kept, and I leaned into his shoulder and let the enormity of it settle over us both. Callum did make it into a thing. He cried, which nobody had warned me about, and then immediately started talking about redecorating the spare room in his house as a weekend option, which Declan shut down in 2 sentences. Margot hugged me for a long time and said, softly, that she was glad. Declan's parents were more measured. His father, Gordon Walsh, shook my hand at a dinner 2 weeks later and said, with the practiced gravity of a man who had been running a family for decades, "You're not what I expected." I waited. "That's not a criticism. He's needed someone he can't see through." His mother, Ruth, was warmer but no less direct. She pulled me aside before dinner and said, "He'll protect you fiercely, sometimes too fiercely. Tell him when it's too much." "I will," I said. "Good." She smiled, and I saw Callum in it. That warmth, the way it cracked open a room. "Now come eat. I make Gordon's mother's schnitzel when I want people to forgive each other things, and tonight I need it to do a lot of work." There was a version of Callum that night who was working hard to be generous, and I saw it. The effort underneath the warmth, the moments where he'd look at his brother and something complicated moved through his face. They had history I didn't fully know yet. Competition, comparison, years of being measured against the same measure. I mentioned it to Declan on the way home. "He and I have been navigating this since we were kids," he said. "The shorthand for our family is that Callum is the face and I'm the engine. It's not wrong, but it flattens things." He watched the city pass outside the car window. "I took the operation and the long work because I'm better at it. He took the relationships and the front because he's better at that. For the most part, it functions." "For the most part," I said. "There are things we've never said to each other." A pause. "I think you make that more visible. You're something I have that isn't about the work. Is that bad?" "No." He found my hand in the dark back seat. "It's overdue." Our daughter was born on a Saturday in late October, 3 weeks ahead of schedule, in a delivery room where Declan proved himself useful in the most Declan way possible, by remaining exactly as calm as I needed him to be, holding my hand with a steady grip and saying quietly, when I told him I needed him to hold it together, "I've got it. I'm here." She was small and loud and had his dark hair and, according to the delivery nurse, my stubborn expression. We named her after my grandmother, Edith May Walsh, and Declan sat in the hospital chair, holding her for the first hour with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Open, unguarded, like something had reached inside all that careful precision and rearranged it. "I didn't know," he said, not looking up from her. "Know what?" that you could want something this much without having a strategy for it. He finally looked at me. She has no respect for my planning whatsoever. I laughed until I cried, which might have been the exhaustion, but also might have been everything. Callum arrived first with flowers and an extravagant stuffed bear that was larger than the baby, and he held Edith for 10 minutes and talked to her in a low, steady voice. I watched Declan watch his brother, and something settled between them in the room. Not fixed, not finished, but softer. She's going to be terrifying, Callum said finally, handing her back. She's going to be exactly what she needs to be, Declan said. The thing nobody tells you about choosing a life that didn't follow the plan you had is that you spend a certain amount of time expecting to regret it, and the regret keeps not coming. What comes instead is more complicated and more specific. The Tuesday evening fights about whose turn it is to deal with the contractor, the Sunday mornings when the light comes through the window at exactly the right angle, and Declan is reading something at the kitchen table, and Edith is making highly ambitious sounds at the ceiling, and I think, this is it. This is the real thing. This is what Careful was protecting me from, and also what Careful couldn't have given me. Marcus sent a brief, kind email when he heard, through the particular algorithm of mutual acquaintances, that I'd had a baby. He said he hoped I was well. I wrote back and said I was. I meant it. Jess came for dinner every few weeks and said Edith was going to be a complete disaster in the most excellent way, which was probably true, and which made Declan look proud in a way he'd never admit to. Callum and I found our own footing, a working friendship that operated slightly separately from his relationship with Declan, which I think was right. He stopped carbon copying me on unnecessary emails sometime around month 3. I took it as a sign of acceptance. Gordon Walsh at Christmas dinner poured me a glass of wine, set it in front of me and said, "You're good for him." That was the whole sentence. For the Walshes it was a speech. Ruth leaned over and said quietly, "He means it. He's just constitutionally incapable of elaborating." "I'm getting used to that," I said. She laughed, and it sounded like home. I think about the lobby sometimes. The cold coffees, the dropped lid, the instinct that misfired in exactly the right direction. I think about how close I came to smoothing it over, to telling myself it was nothing, to staying in the comfortable chair of a life that fit but didn't quite fit. The bravest thing I did wasn't walking away from safe. It was being honest, with Marcus, with Declan, and mostly with myself, about the difference between what I thought I wanted and what I actually needed. The northeast corner of any room is always the problem area. You can avoid it, or you can fix it. I spent a lot of years avoiding mine. I'm glad I finally went and stood in it.